The crack of the whip sliced through the late afternoon air, followed by a strangled sob that Nora Thompson had learned to swallow almost completely. Her back, already a canvas of old scars, burned with fresh pain as she collapsed to her knees in the dusty yard behind their isolated homestead. The Montana Territory of 1873 was vast and unforgiving, but nothing compared to the cruelty of William Thompson, the man she was forced to call father. "Get up, girl," he snarled, the whiskey on his breath carrying across the yard. "That water ain't gonna haul itself." Nora's fingers dug into the dirt as she forced herself upright, her cotton dress torn and sticking to the fresh welts. At 22, she had endured this torture since her mother's death 8 years earlier. The water bucket lay on its side, the precious liquid already soaked into the thirsty ground. "I'm sorry, Pa," she whispered, though she knew no amount of apology would soothe his rage. "Sorry don't fill buckets," he growled, coiling the leather whip that had been his constant companion since he'd returned from the war, broken and vengeful. "Get another pail and don't you spill a drop, or we'll continue this lesson." Nora nodded, keeping her eyes downcast as she retrieved another bucket from the lean-to shed. Her hands trembled as she made her way toward the path that led to the creek, careful to move quickly but steadily. The last rays of sun filtered through the pines, casting long shadows across the terrain she knew by heart. The cool water of the creek was a momentary balm as she dipped her fingers, wishing she could strip away her clothing and submerge her damaged back. But such luxury was impossible with her father waiting, his patience thinner than worn leather. As she filled the bucket, Nora caught a reflection in the water's surface, a thin face framed by dark blonde hair, green eyes that had once sparkled with mischief, now dulled by years of pain. A twig snapped in the woods beyond the creek. Nora's head jerked up, her heart racing as she scanned the tree line. She'd heard rumors of Blackfoot warriors in the area, though they rarely ventured this far south anymore. What she saw instead made her breath catch. A man on horseback stood at the edge of the clearing, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. His hat was pulled low, but she could see he was watching her. Fear coursed through her veins. Strangers were rare in these parts and rarely meant anything good. "Evening, miss," he called softly, his voice carrying across the water. "Don't mean to frighten you." Nora clutched the bucket handle, calculating whether she could outrun him back to the homestead. Her father might be a monster, but at least he was a familiar one. "I'm not frightened," she lied, slowly rising to her feet. "Just startled. These are private lands." The stranger nudged his horse forward, emerging from the shadows. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps mid-20s, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes marked him as a cowhand, worn denim, dusty boots, and a bandana loosely knotted at his throat. "Name's Jake Anderson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just passing through, looking for work. Ranch about 2 miles east, said old man Thompson might need help with his herd." Nora's stomach tightened. Her father did need help. Their small cattle operation was struggling since the last hand had left after one of her father's drunken rages, but bringing this stranger home would mean questions she couldn't answer. "My father isn't hiring," she said firmly, lifting the bucket. "Good evening to you, Mr. Anderson." As she turned, a sharp pain lanced through her back, causing her to gasp and stumble. The bucket tipped, water splashing over her skirts. Panic flooded her system. Another failure, another beating. "Whoa there!" Jake dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing the creek in 3 long strides. "Let me help you with—" He stopped abruptly, and Nora realized with horror that her sudden movement had caused her torn dress to gape, revealing the mess of old and new marks across her shoulders. "Miss Thompson," his voice had changed, hardened somehow. "I fell," she said automatically, the lie practiced over years of explaining away bruises to the few people who ever saw them. "Through some brambles, it's nothing." Jake's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing as he picked up the bucket and refilled it. "Let me carry this back for you," he offered, his tone gentle but brooking no argument. "No." Panic edged her voice. "My father doesn't like strangers. Please, just go." "I reckon I'll introduce myself properly then," Jake said, his jaw set in a determined line as he held the bucket in one hand and offered her his arm with the other. Nora knew she was trapped. If she returned alone and late, the punishment would be severe. If she returned with this stranger, well, her father might behave, at least initially. "He'll be drinking," she warned, reluctantly accepting his assistance. "He's not himself when he drinks." Jake's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps. "I've handled my share of men in their cups, Miss Thompson." The walk back to the homestead stretched Nora's nerves to breaking. Jake led his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, while carrying her water bucket as if it weighed nothing. They walked in silence, but she could feel his occasional glance, assessing, questioning. The cabin came into view, lamplight spilling from the single window. Her father's silhouette passed across it, pacing. "Wait," Nora said suddenly, stopping Jake with a hand on his arm. "Please don't mention what you saw. It will only make things worse." Jake's expression darkened. "I won't speak of it," he promised, though something in his tone suggested he'd made no promise about ignoring it. William Thompson met them at the door, his massive frame blocking the entrance. The smell of whiskey hung about him like a cloud, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as they settled on Jake. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, ignoring Nora completely. Jake stepped forward, setting the bucket down carefully. "Jake Anderson, sir. Looking for work. Heard you might need a hand with your cattle." William's gaze shifted between them suspiciously. "Did you now? And you just happened upon my daughter?" "Found your creek before I found your house," Jake replied easily. "Miss Thompson was kind enough to direct me here." William grunted, eyeing the young man's strong build and capable hands. Nora knew what he was thinking with winter approaching. An extra hand would make the difference between survival and ruin. "Can you ride? Brand? Mend fences?" William barked. "Yes, sir, to all 3. Worked 3 seasons at the Hollow Creek Ranch down Colorado way. Can break horses, too, if needed." Her father's eyes narrowed, but practicality won out over suspicion. "Bunkhouse is out back. It ain't much, but it's dry. $1 a day in meals, dawn to dusk, 6 days a week." Jake nodded. "Much obliged, Mr. Thompson." As her father turned to go back inside, he snagged Nora's arm roughly. "Get dinner on," he ordered, his fingers digging into her flesh, "and see to Mr. Anderson's horse." With that, he disappeared into the cabin, leaving Nora alone with Jake in the yard. The young man's eyes followed William with barely concealed contempt before settling back on her. "I'll see to my own horse," he said quietly. "You go on in." Nora hesitated. "Why did you take the job? This is a small operation, barely scraping by. Hollow Creek must have paid better." Jake adjusted his hat, considering her with those clear blue eyes. "Sometimes a man goes where he's needed, not where the money's best." He paused, then added more softly, The bunkhouse, does it have a lock? The question startled her. Yes, from the inside. Why? Use it tonight if you can get out there, he said simply, then led his horse toward the small structure at the edge of the property, leaving Nora standing in the gathering darkness, a strange flutter of something like hope stirring in her chest for the first time in years. The next few days established an uneasy routine. Jake proved to be everything he'd claimed, skilled with the cattle, tireless with repairs, and unfailingly respectful to Nora whenever her father was present. When William wasn't watching, he found small ways to lighten her burden, drawing water before she woke, splitting extra firewood, even quietly repairing the broken step on the porch that had been a hazard for months. William seemed mollified by Jake's competence, though his drinking continued unabated. His temper, however, was directed less at Nora while the new hand was around. It was as if Jake's presence reminded William of the man he had once been, or should have been. On the 5th day, Nora found herself alone with Jake as they worked together in the barn, sorting through supplies for the coming winter. Her father had ridden to town for supplies and whiskey, leaving strict instructions that the winter inventory be completed before his return. "How long has it been like this?" Jake asked suddenly, breaking the companionable silence that had settled between them. Nora's hands stilled on the burlap sack of beans she'd been examining. "Like what?" Jake's expression was patient but firm. "You know what I'm asking, Nora." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his gentle baritone made her want to trust him. "Since my mother died," she admitted, eyes fixed on the barn floor. 8 years now. He wasn't always like this. The war changed him, then Mother's fever. She trailed off, unable to continue. Jake moved closer, not touching her but offering his presence as comfort. "Has anyone tried to help? The law? Neighbors?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Law? The nearest marshal is 2 days' ride. And neighbors?" She gestured toward the vast emptiness beyond the barn doors. "Our closest neighbor is the Hendersons 5 miles west. Mrs. Henderson brought food when Mother died, but Pa ran her off. We don't get visitors anymore." "Until me," Jake said softly. Nora looked up then, studying his face. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read, determination, perhaps, or anger carefully banked. "Why did you really come here, Jake Anderson? And don't tell me it was for $1 a day and hard work." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features. "Truthful, aren't you? All right then. I was riding north to my brother's place near Helena when I stopped at Pearson's General Store in Cumberland. Heard talk about the Thompson place man and daughter living isolated, man with a bad reputation for drink and temper. Made me curious. Curious enough to take a detour of 10 miles at least," Nora pressed, suspicion creeping in. "Were you looking for trouble, Mr. Anderson?" Jake," he corrected. "And no, not looking for trouble. Just—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen what men like your father can do. My own mother suffered something similar. No one helped her. I guess I wanted to see if the rumors were true, maybe offer help if needed." Nora absorbed this, uncertain how to respond. It had been so long since anyone had offered help without expecting something in return. "I can take care of myself," she said finally, though the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Jake's gaze dropped to her hands, work roughened but trembling slightly. "I believe you can," he said, "but sometimes even the strongest need a friend." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever might have come next. Nora's head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. "He's back early," she whispered, hurriedly returning to her task. Jake touched her arm briefly, just a ghost of contact. Remember what I said about the bunkhouse lock," he murmured, before raising his voice to a normal level. "I reckon we've got enough feed to last through January, but we'll need more by February thaw." William Thompson burst through the barn doors, his massive frame swaying slightly, eyes bloodshot but alert enough to notice their proximity. His hand instinctively went to his belt, where the coiled whip hung like a serpent ready to strike. "Inventory done?" he demanded, gaze fixed accusingly on Nora. "Nearly, sir," Jake answered before she could speak. "Your daughter's been working hard, just needs finishing touches." William grunted, clearly displeased at finding them alone together, but unwilling to show his true nature in front of the hired help. "Got supplies in the wagon. Unload 'em, Anderson. Girl, get inside and start dinner." As Nora slipped past him, William caught her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Don't think I don't see what's happening," he hissed, his breath hot and whiskey soured against her cheek. "He'll be gone soon enough, and we'll have a reckoning about your loose behavior." Nora pulled away, her heart hammering against her ribs as she hurried toward the cabin. She could feel Jake's eyes on her back, but she didn't dare look back. Whatever fragile connection they'd formed in the barn had put them both in danger. That night, as she lay on her thin mattress in the corner of the main room, listening to her father's snores from behind his bedroom door, Nora made a decision. She had to leave. The thought had occurred before, but fear and duty had always kept her rooted to this miserable place. Now, with Jake's unexpected kindness showing her a glimpse of what life could be, the courage she'd buried for so long began to resurface. Morning came with a bitter chill, frost etching patterns on the single window of the cabin. Nora rose quietly, stoking the fire and beginning breakfast preparations. Her father would sleep late after his drinking bout, giving her time to think, to plan. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear Jake enter until he spoke. "Morning," he said softly, setting a bucket of fresh milk on the table. "Thought I'd save you the trip to the barn." Nora startled, nearly dropping the coffee pot. "Thank you," she whispered, glancing nervously at her father's closed door. "You shouldn't be in here. If he wakes—" Jake nodded, understanding her fear. "I'll be gone before he stirs. Just wanted to tell you I'm riding out to check the north pasture fence today. Won't be back till sundown." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. His eyes held a message his words didn't convey. "The north pasture," she repeated slowly. "That's nearly to Henderson's place." "That's right," he confirmed. "If you need anything from that direction, now would be the time to mention it." Nora's mind raced. Was he offering what she thought? A chance to get a message out, perhaps? "No," she said finally, making a split-second decision. "Nothing needed from there." Disappointment flickered across Jake's face before he masked it. "All right then, I'll be." "But," she interrupted, heart pounding, "there's an old trail that runs east of the north pasture, leads to Cumberland eventually. Might be worth checking if you have time. Make sure it's still passable, in case we need it someday." Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes, followed by approval. "Good thinking, Miss Thompson. Always best to know all your routes. I'll check it thoroughly." He tipped his hat and was gone, the door closing silently behind him. Nora stood frozen, terrified by her own boldness, yet exhilarated by the possibility it represented. William Thompson emerged from his room an hour later, surly and hungover. He ate in silence, occasionally glaring at Nora as if her very existence offended him. When he finally spoke, his words chilled her blood. "Anderson's getting too comfortable here," he growled, stabbing his fork into the last piece of bacon. "Think I'll settle up with him end of the week." Nora kept her eyes on her plate. "He's been helpful with the winter preparations." "Don't need help that bad," William snapped, "especially not from a man who looks at what's mine like he's got rights to it." The implication was clear, and Nora felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "He's been nothing but respectful," she defended, immediately regretting her words. William's fist came down on the table, rattling the dishes. "You defending him now? That confirms what I suspected." He stood abruptly, looming over her. "You stay away from that man today. You hear me? I catch you two alone again, and you'll both regret it." With that, he grabbed his coat and stormed out, presumably to check on Jake's work and perhaps to confront him. Nora sat frozen, fear and determination battling within her. If Jake was to be dismissed by week's end, her window for escape was closing fast. Moving with purpose, she cleared the breakfast dishes, then slipped into her small room. From beneath her mattress, she withdrew the few treasures she'd managed to hide over the years: her mother's cameo brooch, a small leather pouch containing the 3 silver dollars she'd squirreled away, and a faded daguerreotype of her mother holding Nora as an infant, back when smiles still came easily to the Thompson household. These she wrapped carefully in her warmest shawl, along with the change of clothes and the half loaf of bread left from yesterday's baking. It wasn't much to start a new life with, but it was all she had. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Nora completed her chores mechanically, her mind racing between hope and terror. What if her father had confronted Jake already? What if Jake had changed his mind about helping her? What if this was all a terrible mistake that would result in punishment worse than any she'd endured before? By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising an early winter storm. Nora's heart sank as she watched the sky from the cabin window. Bad weather would make travel dangerous, perhaps impossible. The sound of a horse approaching sent her scurrying back to her tasks, arranging her features into the mask of submission she'd perfected over the years. But it wasn't her father who burst through the door. It was Jake, his expression grim and urgent. "Your father's had an accident," he announced without preamble, water dripping from his hat brim. "His horse spooked at a rattlesnake, threw him into the creek bed. Legs broken bad, maybe his arm too." Nora gasped, conflicting emotions surging through her concern, despite everything, but also a shameful relief that momentarily overwhelmed her. "Where is he?" she managed to ask. "Left him sheltered under the ridge by Cottonwood Creek. Splinted his leg best I could, but he needs a doctor." Jake stepped closer, lowering his voice though they were alone. "Storm's coming fast. Cumberland's closer than the Henderson place. I can ride for the doctor, but—" His eyes held hers, and in that moment, Nora understood what he was really offering. "He'll die out there alone in this weather," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. Jake's expression remained neutral. "Maybe, or maybe he'll survive and come back unchanged. Either way, Nora, this might be your only chance." Nora closed her eyes, years of fear and pain washing over her. When she opened them, her decision was made. "I'll get my things," she said quietly. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes, not hours," Jake replied, relief evident in his voice. "Storm's moving fast, and your father, even injured, isn't a man I'd underestimate. Someone might come looking when we don't return." Nora nodded, rushing to collect her small bundle of possessions. When she returned, Jake was watching the approaching storm from the doorway, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "Ready?" he asked without turning. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find her voice steady. "But what about you? Won't my father seek revenge when he realizes you helped me?" Jake turned then, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Let's just say I don't plan on being found. My brother and Helene is expecting me. But after that," he shrugged, "the West is a big place." They stepped outside into the rising wind, Jake leading his chestnut gelding. To Nora's surprise, there was a second horse saddled and waiting, a sturdy bay mare she recognized as her father's second-best mount. "You planned this," she accused, though there was no anger in her tone. "Let's say I hoped," Jake corrected, helping her secure her bundle to the saddle. "The trail east is clear enough for about 10 miles. Then you'll hit the Cumberland Road. From there, it's another day's ride to town." Nora frowned, confused. "But aren't you coming with me?" Jake hesitated, one hand on the gelding's reins. "I thought, that is, I didn't want to presume. This is your escape, Nora. I'm just providing the means." Understanding dawned, warming her despite the chill wind. He was giving her a choice, true freedom, not just trading one man's protection for another's. "And if I wanted company on the journey?" she asked boldly, surprising herself. The smile that broke across Jake's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then I'd be honored to ride alongside you, Miss Thompson." As if punctuating his words, a distant roll of thunder echoed across the valley. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, speckling the dust at their feet. "We need to move," Jake urged, his expression turning serious again. "Your father is a survivor," Nora finished for him, "and so am I. But I don't want to just survive anymore, Jake. I want to live." With those words, she gathered her courage and mounted the bay mare, adjusting her skirts as best she could for riding astride. Jake swung up onto his gelding, his eyes never leaving her face. "East to Cumberland, then?" he asked, though they both knew he was asking much more. Nora nodded, her heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. "East to Cumberland," she confirmed, "and then wherever the road takes us." As they urged their horses forward, the storm broke in earnest, rain lashing at them in wind-driven sheets. Nora ducked her head against it, following Jake's lead as they left behind the only home she'd ever known, a place that had become a prison of pain and fear. They rode hard through the afternoon, the storm providing cover for their flight, but making the going treacherous. The eastern trail skirted the foothills, winding through stands of pine and across shallow streams now swollen with rainwater. Jake set a punishing pace, clearly worried about pursuit despite William Thompson's injuries. By dusk, they had covered perhaps 8 miles, good progress given the conditions, but not the distance Jake had hoped for. The rain had slackened to a steady drizzle, but darkness was falling fast, and the temperature dropping with it. "There's an old line shack about half a mile ahead," Jake called back to her, gesturing toward a thicket of pines. "Used by trappers mostly, but it should be dry." Nora nodded, too exhausted to reply. Hours in the saddle had awakened every dormant pain in her body, especially the barely healed wounds on her back. But she wouldn't complain. Every hoofbeat carried her further from her father's reach. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small stone fireplace and a packed dirt floor. It smelled of must and pine, but it was dry and sheltered from the wind that had begun to howl through the trees. Jake insisted on seeing to the horses first, leading them to a lean-to attached to the shack's northern wall. Nora busied herself inside, sweeping away cobwebs and clearing space near the fireplace. By the time Jake returned, stamping rain from his boots, she had arranged their meager supplies and was attempting to start a fire with the dry wood stacked beside the hearth. "Here, let me," he offered, kneeling beside her. His fingers brushed hers as he took the flint, and Nora felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the cold. Soon, a small fire was crackling, casting wavering light across the cramped interior. Jake hung his wet coat and hat on a peg by the door, then turned to Nora with concern etched on his features. "You're soaked through," he observed, "and shivering." Nora tried to smile, but her teeth were chattering too hard to manage it. "I'll be fine once I warm up," she assured him, though in truth she felt chilled to the bone. Jake rummaged in his saddlebags, producing a worn but clean flannel shirt. "It's dry," he said simply, offering it to her. "I'll step outside while you change." Gratitude washed over Nora. "No need to go back into the rain," she said. "Just turn your back, please." Jake nodded, positioning himself at the single window, his gaze fixed determinedly on the stormy night outside. Nora quickly peeled off her sodden dress, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the wounds on her back. She slipped Jake's shirt over her head, the soft flannel falling nearly to her knees. It smelled of leather and pine, with an underlying scent that was uniquely Jake. "I'm decent," she announced, spreading her wet dress near the fire to dry. Jake turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in his clothing. Something flickered in his gaze. Appreciation, certainly, but also a deeper emotion she couldn't quite name. "Better?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Much," she confirmed, settling cross-legged near the fire. "Thank you for everything." Jake joined her, maintaining a respectful distance as he spread their food supplies between them: bread, dried beef, and a small flask of water. "I wish I had more to offer," he said apologetically, breaking the bread. Nora accepted her portion with a genuine smile. "This is a feast compared to what awaited me at home." They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling and the rain pattering on the roof, creating a cocoon of tranquility that felt surreal after the day's events. When they'd finished, Jake leaned back against the wall, studying her with those clear blue eyes. "Tomorrow we'll reach Cumberland," he said. "You should think about what comes next." Nora pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I haven't thought beyond escape," she admitted. "I have a little money enough for a stage ticket somewhere, perhaps, or to rent a room while I find work." "What kind of work?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. Nora considered this. She had few marketable skills beyond the domestic tasks she'd performed under her father's roof. "I can cook, clean, sew reasonably well. Perhaps a boarding house would hire me." Jake nodded slowly. "That's possible, or—" He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "Or," Nora prompted, "my brother's ranch near Helena, it's not large, but it's growing. His wife was just saying they need help with the household, especially with a baby coming." Jake's eyes met hers. "It would be safe there. No one would think to look for you." Nora absorbed this, turning the offer over in her mind. "And you? Would you be there too?" A flush crept up Jake's neck. "Sometimes. I help out during calving season, and winters when they need an extra hand. But I've mostly been on the drift these past few years." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Jake's expression grew distant. "After my mother died, my father remarried. His new wife had little use for his grown sons. My brother Joshua left first, built something of his own. I stayed longer. trying to make peace for my father's sake. He shook his head. Eventually, I realized some situations can't be fixed from within. The parallel to her own life wasn't lost on Nora. So you've been wandering ever since? No place to call home? The saddle's been my home, Jake confirmed, though something in his tone suggested this nomadic existence wasn't entirely by choice. But lately I've been thinking it might be time to set down roots somewhere. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Nora found herself staring at Jake's hands, strong, capable hands that had helped her without demanding anything in return. "Why did you really stop at our creek that day?" she asked suddenly. "The truth, Jake." He met her gaze steadily. "I told you I heard talk in Cumberland." "Yes, but why did it matter to you? There must be dozens of sad stories in these parts." Jake was silent for a long moment, the firelight playing across his features. "Because when I was 12, I watched my mother suffer under my father's hand for the last time," he said finally, his voice low. "I was too young, too weak to stop it. By the time my brother came home and intervened, she'd already taken the damage that eventually killed her." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I wouldn't hesitate." The raw honesty in his voice brought tears to Nora's eyes. "I'm sorry about your mother," she whispered. "I'm sorry about your back," he replied simply. "No one deserves to be treated that way, Nora, no one." Something broke open inside her at those words, a dam of emotion she'd held back for years. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and before she knew what was happening, Jake had moved to her side, one arm carefully around her shoulders as she sobbed against his chest. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Nora wasn't sure how long she cried, minutes or hours, but eventually the tears subsided, leaving her drained, but somehow lighter. She became acutely aware of Jake's warmth, the steady beat of his heart under her cheek, his hand gently stroking her hair. "I've soaked your shirt," she mumbled, embarrassed but reluctant to move away. "I've got another," he assured her, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Feel better?" Nora nodded, slowly pulling back to look at him. Their faces were inches apart, his expression so tender it made her heart ache. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, with a sudden intensity that startled her. Instead, Jake carefully tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a heartbeat before he moved back, restoring a proper distance between them. "You should rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Nora nodded, disappointed yet relieved at the same time. Everything was happening so quickly, her escape, these new feelings, the uncertain future stretching before them. She needed time to understand her own heart. Jake arranged his bedroll near the door, positioning himself between Nora and any potential danger from outside. She curled up on her side near the fire, using her bundle as a pillow, Jake's flannel shirt warm around her. "Jake?" she whispered into the semi-darkness. "Yes?" His voice came back immediately, suggesting he was as far from sleep as she was. "Thank you for not leaving me there." A pause, then softly, "Thank you for finding the courage to leave." Sleep came surprisingly easily after that, deeper and more peaceful than Nora had experienced in years. No nightmares plagued her, no fear of what morning might bring. For the first time in memory, she slept with hope in her heart. She awoke to pale light filtering through the single grimy window and the smell of coffee. Jake was already up, tending a fresh fire over which a small pot bubbled. "Morning," he greeted her, his smile warming her more effectively than the fire. thought you could use this before we ride." He poured the dark liquid into a tin cup and offered it to her. Nora sat up, conscious of her rumpled appearance and tangled hair. "You found coffee?" "Always carry some in my saddlebags," Jake explained. "Never know when you'll need civilizing influences." She accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma before taking a careful sip. It was strong and bitter, but wonderfully reviving. The storms passed. Jake continued, moving to check outside. "Clear skies, but cold. Your dress should be dry enough to wear now." Nora glanced at the garment, still hanging near the fireplace. It represented everything she was leaving behind: servitude, pain, fear. Part of her wanted to leave it crumpled on the dirt floor of the line shack. Jake seemed to read her thoughts. "We can find you new clothes in Cumberland," he said gently. "But for now—" "I understand," she sighed, setting down her coffee. "I'll change." Once again, Jake turned his back, while she slipped from his shirt into her own dress. The fabric felt stiff and unwelcoming against her skin, but at least it was dry. "Ready," she announced, reluctantly folding his flannel shirt and returning it to him. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Nora felt that same inexplicable jolt as the night before. Jake's eyes met hers, darkening slightly before he turned away to pack their meager supplies. "We should reach Cumberland by midday," he explained as they saddled the horses. "From there, we have choices to make." The emphasis he placed on "we" did not escape Nora's notice. "I've been thinking about your brother's ranch," she said carefully, adjusting her horse's girth strap. "It sounds peaceful." Jake paused in his own preparations, studying her over his gelding's back. "It is. Joshua and Sarah have built something good there. You'd be welcome." "And you?" Nora pressed, needing clarification. "Would you stay too?" A slow smile spread across Jake's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I reckon I could be persuaded to linger a while, see how you settle in." It wasn't a declaration of intent exactly, but it was enough for now. Nora returned his smile, a warm flutter of possibility taking root in her chest. They rode out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the wet landscape in shades of gold and amber. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, but the sky was a perfect, endless blue. Nora breathed deeply, savoring the sense of freedom that expanded with every mile they put between themselves and her father's homestead. Jake set a steadier pace than the previous day, confident that the storm would have erased their tracks and delayed any potential pursuit. They rode side by side where the trail allowed, exchanging stories and observations about the countryside. Nora found herself laughing at Jake's dry humor, a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled her the first time it bubbled up. By mid-morning, they'd reached the junction with the Cumberland Road, a wider, better-maintained trail that showed signs of regular use. Wagon ruts cut through the mud, and occasionally they passed other travelers, a freight wagon headed west, an old trapper with a string of mules, a family in a covered wagon bound for Oregon. Nora pulled her shawl closer around her face when they encountered others, irrational fear making her heart race, despite the unlikelihood that anyone would recognize her or guess their situation. "No one's looking for you yet," Jake assured her after one such encounter left her visibly shaken. "And even if they were, you have every right to be traveling these roads. You're not property, Nora. You're a free woman." The word struck her with surprising force. A free woman. The concept was so foreign, so breathtakingly vast that she could barely comprehend it. All her life, she'd been defined by her relationships to others: daughter, caretaker, victim. What did it mean to simply be Nora? Cumberland appeared on the horizon shortly after noon, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a single dusty street, with a church steeple and a few false-fronted stores, giving it an air of permanence that belied its frontier status. Nora had visited only a handful of times in her life, always under her father's watchful eye. Now she viewed it with new eyes, not as a brief respite from isolation, but as the first step toward a different future. "We should get supplies before moving on," Jake suggested as they approached the town limits. "Food, ammunition, maybe some warmer clothes for you." Nora nodded, suddenly conscious of her shabby dress and worn shawl. "I have a little money," she reminded him. "So do I," Jake replied easily. "We'll manage." They tied their horses at the hitching post outside Pearson's General Store, a two-story building that served as the commercial heart of Cumberland. Nora hesitated at the entrance, anxiety churning in her stomach. What if someone recognized her? What if word got back to her father? Jake's hand settled lightly at the small of her back, careful to avoid her injuries. "It'll be all right," he murmured. "Just follow my lead." Inside, the store was warm and aromatic, filled with the mingled scents of coffee, leather, tobacco, and spices. A pot-bellied stove radiated heat from the center of the room, surrounded by barrels of dry goods and shelves laden with merchandise of every description. At the counter, a portly man with impressive side whiskers was tallying an order for a rancher's wife. Jake guided Nora toward a display of women's ready-made clothing, keeping his voice low. "Pick something practical for riding, and warm." While she examined the modest selection of skirts and shirtwaists, Jake moved to the counter to inquire about supplies. Nora couldn't hear their conversation over the general bustle of the store, but she noticed the shopkeeper, presumably Mr. Pearson, glancing in her direction several times. By the time Jake returned to her side, she had selected a sensible dark blue riding skirt, 2 shirtwaists, and a heavier shawl for the increasingly cold weather. "The stagecoach to Helena leaves tomorrow morning," Jake informed her, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Pearson says there's a decent boarding house where we can get rooms for the night, clean and respectable." Nora nodded, relieved they wouldn't have to camp another night. As practical as the line shack had been, the proximity to Jake had awakened feelings she wasn't entirely prepared to examine. "Did he—" she hesitated, glancing toward the shopkeeper. "Did he recognize me?" Jake shook his head. "Don't think so. And I didn't give him reason to be curious. Just said we're headed to Helena to visit family." They completed their purchases without incident, the clothing for Nora, provisions for the journey, and a small revolver that Jake insisted she take just in case. The weight of it in her pocket was both frightening and reassuring. The Willow Creek boarding house proved to be a tidy 2-story structure at the edge of town, run by a brusque widow named Mrs. Holbrook, who scrutinized them with narrowed eyes, but accepted Jake's story that they were siblings traveling to Helena for a family wedding. "Men's rooms upstairs at the back, women's at the front," she instructed, pocketing their payment. "Supper's at 6 sharp, breakfast at dawn. No alcohol, no visitors in the rooms, and no exceptions." "Yes, madam," Jake agreed solemnly, though Nora caught the twinkle in his eye as Mrs. Holbrook turned away. The room assigned to Nora was small but scrupulously clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the main street. After weeks of sleeping on a thin pallet in her father's cabin, it seemed luxuriously private. She changed into one of her new shirtwaists, carefully washing away the dust of travel before rebraiding her hair. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was changed somehow, still her own features, but animated by something new. Hope perhaps, or the first stirrings of genuine happiness. At supper, served in the boarding house's tidy dining room, they were joined by the only other guests, an elderly couple returning from visiting grandchildren in Virginia City, and a young drummer selling patent medicines throughout the territory. Conversation remained general and polite, with no one asking uncomfortable questions about their travels or relationship. Jake played his role as devoted brother convincingly, though Nora caught him watching her with an expression that was decidedly unbrotherly when he thought no one was looking. The awareness that simmered between them made her cheeks warm and her appetite falter. After the meal, they stepped onto the boarding house's small front porch to enjoy the crisp evening air before retiring. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky, brilliant pinpoints against the velvet blackness that could only be found far from city lights. "One more day," Jake said quietly, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "By this time tomorrow, we'll be halfway to Helena." "It doesn't seem real," Nora admitted, gazing up at the constellations she'd watched since childhood, but never with such a sense of possibility. "Part of me still expects to wake up back in that cabin." Jake's hand found hers on the railing, his fingers warm as they curled around her smaller ones. "This is real, Nora. You're free now." She turned to look at him, studying the strong lines of his profile in the faint light spilling from the house windows. "Because of you." Jake shook his head, squeezing her hand gently. "I just provided the opportunity. You found the courage to take it." Nora wanted to argue, to make him understand how pivotal his appearance had been in her life, but footsteps inside warned them of Mrs. Holbrook's approach. They stepped apart quickly, returning to their sibling roles as the landlady poked her head outside. "Turning in for the night," she announced. "Don't forget to douse the porch lamp when you come in." "Yes, madam," Jake replied respectfully. "Won't be much longer." When they were alone again, the moment had passed, replaced by a comfortable silence as they contemplated the road ahead. "Try to get some rest," Jake advised eventually. "Stage leaves early and it'll be a rough ride." Nora nodded, reluctantly moving toward the door. "Good night, Jake." His smile in the lamplight made her heart skip a beat. "Good night, Nora. Sweet dreams." That night, in her narrow boarding house bed, Nora did dream not of whips and pain and fear, but of open skies and endless possibilities, and a pair of blue eyes that promised something she'd never dared hope for. A future worth living. Morning arrived with a crisp clarity that matched Nora's mood. She dressed in her new riding skirt and shirtwaist, arranging her hair neatly before descending to breakfast. Jake was already at the table, conversing amiably with the elderly couple while sipping coffee. His face brightened when he saw her, a reaction that did not escape the notice of the old woman, who smiled knowingly into her teacup. "Stage should be here within the hour," Jake informed her as she took the seat beside him. "I've already seen to the horses, sold them to the livery stable for a fair price." Nora felt a pang at the thought of leaving behind the bay mare which had carried her to freedom. "Both of them?" Jake nodded. "We can't manage them on the stage, and we'll need the money for our tickets and settling in Helena. Don't worry, the liveryman seemed decent enough. They'll be treated well." Their journey from Cumberland to Helena took 2 days, the stagecoach lurching along rutted roads that wound through mountain passes and vast valleys. They traveled with 4 other passengers, a young doctor taking up practice in Helena, 2 mining investors returning from inspecting claims, and a school teacher bound for a position in a frontier settlement beyond Helena. Jake and Nora maintained their sibling pretense, though it grew increasingly difficult, as the enforced proximity of the coach heightened their awareness of each other. Every jolt that pressed them together, every shared smile at the doctor's enthusiastic descriptions of modern medical marvels, every quiet conversation while the others dozed, all served to deepen a connection that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. By the time the stage rolled into Helena on the afternoon of the second day, Nora felt as though she'd known Jake Anderson all her life. His steadiness calmed her fears about the future. His dry humor coaxed genuine laughter from her. His quiet strength made her feel protected without being possessed. Helena itself was a revelation, a proper city with brick buildings, boardwalks, and a bustling main street that made Cumberland look like the frontier outpost it was. Nora gazed wide-eyed at the shop windows, displaying fashionable goods, the restaurants offering cuisine beyond simple frontier fare, the theater advertising professional productions. "It's so big," she marveled as Jake helped her down from the stage. "How will we ever find your brother's ranch?" Jake smiled, shouldering their meager belongings. "Joshua's place is about 10 miles east of town. He usually comes in on Thursdays for supplies, which happens to be today. With luck, we'll find him at the Mercantile or the bank." Luck was with them. They'd barely begun their inquiries when a tall man emerged from the saddlery across the street, a man who could only be Jake's brother. The family resemblance was striking, though Joshua Anderson was broader through the shoulders, his hair a shade darker, his face weathered by years of ranching. "Jake?" he called, spotting them immediately. His face broke into a wide grin as he crossed the street in long strides. "Wasn't expecting you for another month." The brothers embraced warmly, pounding each other's backs in that peculiar way men had of showing affection without sentimentality. When they stepped apart, Joshua's curious gaze fell on Nora, who stood awkwardly to one side. "And who might this be?" he asked, his tone friendly but assessing. Jake's arm came around Nora's shoulders, gentle but protective. "Joshua, this is Nora Thompson. Circumstances have brought us together, and she's in need of a fresh start. Nora, my brother Joshua." Understanding dawned in Joshua's eyes as he took in their travel-worn appearance and the wariness in Nora's posture. Whatever silent communication passed between the brothers, it resulted in Joshua's expression softening. "Any friend of Jake's is welcome at our table," he said simply, offering Nora his hand. "My wife Sarah will be delighted to have another woman around the place. She's been saying for months that the ranch is overrun with men and cattle in that order." Relief washed over Nora as she shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I don't want to impose—" "Joshua," he corrected with a smile. "And it's no imposition. Jake's letter mentioned she might be interested in helping around the house. With Sarah expecting in spring, she could use the assistance." Nora glanced at Jake in surprise. "Your letter?" Jake had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I sent a telegram from Cumberland while you were getting fitted for your riding skirt," he explained. "Wanted to make sure we'd be welcome." "Always thinking ahead," Joshua remarked with brotherly affection. "Now, if you're both ready, I've got the wagon loaded and was just about to head home. Sarah's expecting me back before dark." The Anderson Ranch proved to be everything Jake had described, and more a thriving operation nestled in a valley with mountains rising majestically to the east and rolling grasslands stretching westward. The main house was a substantial log structure with stone chimneys at either end, surrounded by a collection of outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed. Sarah Anderson welcomed them with genuine warmth, her advanced pregnancy doing nothing to diminish her energy or hospitality. She was a petite woman with lively brown eyes and a practical manner that immediately put Nora at ease. "Another woman at last!" she exclaimed, embracing Nora as if they were long-lost friends. "You have no idea how desperate I've been for female conversation. These men talk of nothing but cattle and weather." That first evening established a pattern that would carry forward into the weeks ahead. Meals were taken around the large kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between ranch business, local news, and gentle teasing among the brothers. Nora, initially quiet and watchful, gradually found her voice in this accepting atmosphere. Sarah showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom that had previously served as a sewing room. "It's not much," she apologized, "but we can make it homier with some curtains and perhaps a quilt." "It's perfect," Nora assured her, fighting tears at the simple kindness. "I can't thank you enough." Sarah studied her with perceptive eyes. "Jake didn't say much in his telegram, but I can guess what brought you here," she said gently. "Whatever it was, it's behind you now. This is a fresh start." Nora's hands trembled as she unpacked her few possessions. "I'm afraid I don't have much to offer in return for your kindness." "Nonsense," Sarah dismissed this with a wave. "You'll earn your keep and we'll be glad of your company. Besides," she added with a knowing smile, "I've never seen Jake look at anyone the way he looks at you. That alone makes you family in my book." The days quickly settled into a rhythm. Nora helped Sarah with household tasks, learned the routines of the ranch, and gradually shed the constant fear that had been her companion for so long. Her back began to heal, the physical scars fading faster than the emotional ones, but healing nonetheless. Jake divided his time between ranch work and gradually courting Nora, nothing overt or presumptuous, but small attentions that spoke of his growing feelings. He carved a delicate wooden box for her mother's cameo, brought wildflowers from the high meadows, taught her to ride properly on a gentle mare Joshua assigned for her use. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains while sharing stories and dreams. Jake spoke of perhaps building a small house on the eastern section of his brother's land, good grazing country that could support a decent herd to start his own operation. "Would you like to see it?" he asked one crisp November afternoon. "The land, I mean." Nora nodded, eager for any time alone with him. They rode out after the midday meal, following a creek that wound through stands of aspen now bare of leaves, their white trunks stark against the blue sky. The site Jake had in mind lay in a protected hollow with a natural spring and enough flat ground for a modest house and garden. He helped Nora dismount, watching her face anxiously as she surveyed the location. "It faces south, so it would get good light year-round," he explained, guiding her to where he envisioned the house, "and that ridge would block the worst of the winter winds." Nora turned slowly, taking in the peaceful setting. "It's beautiful, Jake." "You could see yourself living in a place like this?" he asked carefully, his voice casual but his eyes intent. The question hung in the air between them, its deeper meaning unmistakable. Nora's heart quickened as she met his gaze. "With the right person," she replied softly, "I could see myself very happy here." Jake's expression transformed, hope blazing across his features. He took a step toward her, then hesitated. "Nora, I know it hasn't been long." "It's been long enough," she interrupted, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Long enough to know what I want, what I feel." Jake closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "And what do you feel?" he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. Safe, she answered immediately. Valued, and, she swallowed hard, loved. The last word lifted into a question, vulnerable and hopeful. Yes, Jake confirmed, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. Loved. So deeply loved, Nora Thompson. When he finally kissed her, it was with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, as if she were something precious, something to be cherished rather than possessed. Nora melted into him, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the emotion she'd kept locked away for so long. They rode back to the ranch, hand in hand, plans and possibilities unfolding between them, like the landscape stretching to the horizon, vast and full of promise. December brought snow, and the quiet of winter settling over the ranch. Jake began construction on a small cabin at the site they'd chosen, working alongside Joshua and 2 ranch hands whenever weather permitted. Nora divided her time between helping Sarah prepare for the coming baby and assembling the modest furnishings that would make the cabin a home. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Jake took Nora's hand before the assembled family and asked her properly to be his wife. "I know I'm not a wealthy man," he said, his voice steady, but his hand trembling slightly as he offered her a simple gold band. "But everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you'll have me." Nora's yes was whispered through joyful tears, and the kiss they shared was witnessed by the approving smiles of Joshua and Sarah. They were married by the circuit preacher on New Year's Day, 1874, in the parlor of the main ranch house. Nora wore a dove gray dress that Sarah had helped her make, with a cameo brooch at her throat. Jake looked almost uncomfortably handsome in a new shirt and string tie, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Nora's face throughout the simple ceremony. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, beaming at the obviously besotted couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Anderson." Jake did so with appropriate restraint given their audience, but the promise in his eyes made Nora blush to the roots of her hair. Their cabin was ready enough for habitation, though Jake apologized for its rustic state as he carried her across the threshold that evening. "It's perfect," Nora assured him, taking in the simple furnishings, a table and chairs, a cupboard for dishes, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and the bed frame Jake had crafted himself, now made up with the wedding quilt Sarah and Nora had stitched through the autumn evenings. "It's just a beginning," Jake promised, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "We'll add to it as we can." "I don't need much," Nora told him truthfully. "Just you, just this." Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nora's head pillowed on Jake's chest, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here from terror to tranquility, from survival to joy. "What are you thinking?" Jake murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Nora propped herself up to look at his face, silvered by moonlight streaming through the window. "I was thinking about that day at the creek," she said. "How afraid I was when I first saw you." Jake tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his expression solemn. "And now? Now I know it was the luckiest day of my life," she answered simply. "The day freedom found me." Jake pulled her down for a kiss that spoke of tenderness and passion in equal measure. "No, Mrs. Anderson," he corrected when they finally parted. "It was the day you found your own courage. I just had the good fortune to be there to see it." As spring greened the valley and Sarah's baby, a healthy boy they named Thomas, filled the ranch with new life, News reached them through a passing cattle buyer that William Thompson had been found dead in his cabin during the winter. He had apparently survived his fall, but had drunk himself into a fatal stupor during one of the season's worst blizzards. Nora received the news with complex emotions: relief, sadness for what might have been, and finally, a sense of closure that allowed her to fully embrace her new life. The small herd Jake had begun with his savings and Joshua's backing flourished under his careful management. The cabin gained a proper kitchen and a second bedroom in anticipation of the family they hoped to start. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Jake presented Nora with a gift that brought tears to her eyes, a journal bound in soft leather with her new initials stamped on the cover. "For your stories," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth surface. "You tell them so beautifully to Sarah's Thomas. They should be written down." Nora opened the cover to find Jake's strong handwriting on the first page. "The past may leave its marks upon us, but it is the courage to ride toward an unknown future that defines us. With all my love, Jake." That night she began to write not just for herself or for Jake, but for the children they would have someday. She wanted them to know that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could find a way. That sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, like a stranger on horseback offering water and dignity to a girl who had forgotten she deserved both. 3 years later, as Nora sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Jake play with their daughter Eva in the summer twilight, she reflected on the scars that had once defined her existence. They were still there, faded lines across her back that occasionally ached when the weather changed. But now they were simply part of her story, not its conclusion. Jake caught her watching them and smiled that same smile that had first kindled hope in her heart. He whispered something to their giggling daughter, then crossed the yard to join Nora on the porch steps. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her and taking her hand. Nora leaned into his solid warmth, watching Eva chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she answered truthfully. Jake's arm encircled her shoulders. Careful as always of the scars he had never forgotten but never defined her by. "Me too," he murmured against her hair. "Me too." As night fell gently over the valley they now called home, Nora Thompson Anderson gave thanks for the journey that had brought her here, for the pain that had forged her strength, for the kindness that had restored her faith, and for the love that had finally brought her home.